I just faced the worst kind of queen bee you could imagine. The type who turns a commercial jet into her personal reality show, thinking her status makes her immune to physics and federal law. But she had no idea I was the only person on that plane whose entire job was to make sure she didn't get away with it. This wasn't just a rude passenger. This was a coordinated, violent attempt to breach the cockpit at 35,000 feet. And the person she mocked for sitting in first class was about to be the one to put the cuffs on her. Let me take you back to the terminal at JFK, a Friday night. I'm Jake Monroe, but to the world, I was just a tired logistics manager named Ben flying home to Dallas. Hoodie up, baseball cap low, blending into the stale, corporate, anxiety-scented air of the late-night terminal. That's the whole job description, really. Most of the time, I'm just babysitting the sky, watching for tells, for that statistical blip that flagged this specific flight. Flight 407. It's hours of forced stillness, analyzing the way a guy fiddles with his earbuds, or the tremor in a woman's hand when she takes her water. The quiet that wears you down, not the noise. And then the noise arrived. Her name I'd learn was Serafina, but everyone in the terminal, and certainly everyone online, knew her as the Million-Mile Queen. She swept into the gate area like a self-important weather front. Her voice a finely tuned weapon, loud enough to draw attention but just shy of being actually controllable. She had her phone on a diamond-studded gimbal, pointed right at her perfectly contoured, perpetually indignant face. "And you will not believe the utter incompetence," she announced to her invisible audience. "They had the audacity to weigh my luxury weekender bag. As if I, with 3 million lifetime miles, don't know the rules." She paused, letting the manufactured outrage settle. But only a few souls looked up, and those who did quickly looked away. "Nobody wants to make eye contact with the eye of the storm," my Uncle Vince used to say. "Some people walk through life like they're the only ones with a script." Serafina was the writer, director, and star of her own terrible, low-budget movie, and we were all just the unpaid, slightly annoyed extras. When they called for Group 1, she cut in front of an elderly couple, flashing her gold-plated boarding pass like it was a royal decree. I waited for my group, blending with the weary shadows of Group 2. My goal is always the same: be the most forgettable man in the room. I filed onto the jet bridge and into the recycled air of the cabin. Serafina was already entrenched in Seat 1C, the aisle seat in the front row of first class. Her phone was propped up, still live streaming, as she loudly lectured the flight attendant, Chloe, about the non-existent pre-departure champagne. I mean, what is the point of status if there's no service? My seat was 2A, directly behind her, across the narrow aisle. It was the vantage point. It gives you a clear sight line to the cockpit door and the entire forward galley, built for quick, decisive moves. As I moved past her, my duffel bag, which holds little more than a book I won't read and the tools of my trade, might have brushed the air a whole inch from her shoulder. Her head snapped around, her eyes cold and assessing. She scanned my simple gray hoodie, my worn jeans, my generic sneakers, and a sneer curled her lip. She didn't lower her voice. She wanted the cabin and her online audience to hear it. "Oh, great," she said, dripping with disdain. "People like you don't usually sit in first class." She let the insult land. "I hope you know how to behave." The elderly woman she'd cut earlier leaned out and stage whispered, "Honey, he looks cleaner than your soul," her husband added. "And better shoes." A small victory, and the petty part of me wanted to say something dry and cutting, but that wasn't the job. The job was to be gray, invisible. So I showed no reaction, paused for a single flat second, and continued to my seat. I buckled in, and the core question started to hum in the back of my mind. What makes someone truly believe they are untouchable? She had no idea who or what was sitting in 2A. Then came the quiet little dance of confirmation. Chloe, the purser, approached my row, her smile professional but her eyes sharp. She was looking at the woman by the window, but her body was angled toward me. "Mr. Monroe," she said, polite and conversational, "can I get you a pre-departure water?" We have still or sparkling, this was it. The non-verbal handshake. My answer was the countersign. Still is fine. "Thanks," I replied, my tone level. "It's been a long day." Still was the keyword. It told her I was the designated air marshal. She and I were now partners in a silent contract. Her smile tightened fractionally. A barely perceptible acknowledgement, and she moved on. No one else noticed the exchange. The first piece was on the board. My mind was already building a three-dimensional map of the cabin. My seating choice wasn't random. From 2A, I had an unobstructed view of the cockpit door. I scanned the cabin, not as a passenger, but as a predator assesses a new environment. In 3D, a big man with a military-style haircut sat ramrod straight. Clean hands, watchful eyes. I mentally tagged him. Marcus, an asset. Across the aisle in 3C sat a man who was the polar opposite. Sweating, eyes darting. Always coming back to Serafina. He was with her. A partner. A liability. The moment the plane began its slow pushback, the power dynamics shifted. On the ground, Serafina could, in theory, be removed. Once that door was armed and we were under federal jurisdiction, the rules changed. She seemed to understand this, and it made her bolder. She unbuckled her belt and stood up, reaching for the overhead bin. "Ma'am," Chloe said, instantly at her side. "You need to be seated with your seatbelt fastened for taxi, takeoff, and landing." Serafina waved a dismissive hand, addressing her phone. "You see this? This is the kind of power-mad nonsense you have to deal with. I just need my hydrating mist. My skin gets so dry." "Ma'am, it's a federal aviation regulation." Chloe's voice remained calm but firm. "I need you to sit down and buckle up now." Serafina finally turned, her eyes flashing. "Do you know who I am? I have over 2 million followers. One post from me, and this airline's stock will tank. Are you going to let me get my mist, or do I have to make this a bigger issue?" This was the test, a classic power play. She was probing the system, using her perceived influence as a weapon. Chloe held her ground, a pro. "Ma'am, please sit down." The please was a courtesy, the tone was an order. With a dramatic sigh for her audience, Serafina slumped back into her seat, slamming the seatbelt into place. The crisis was averted, but it was a warning shot. She now knew the crew wouldn't be easily cowed. She would have to try a different tactic. As the plane climbed through the clouds, I watched her. She was tapping furiously on her phone, crafting her narrative of victimhood. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The game was on. The first hour passed in a deceptive calm. Then, just as we were passing over the dark expanse of the Arizona desert, it began. A frantic series of dings. From the flight attendant, call button echoed from the back. Chloe and the younger flight attendant, Rory, hurried down the aisle. A moment later, a passenger shouted, "Is there a doctor on board?" "Someone's having trouble breathing." The classic script. My eyes snapped back to Serafina. She hadn't even turned around. She just sat there, sipping her champagne, a faint, knowing smile on her face. This was her move. The diversion. The captain's voice came on, announcing light turbulence and turning the seatbelt sign back on. The perfect cover. Chloe and Rory began the process of moving the beverage cart back up the aisle to clear a path. And that's when Serafina's partner in 3C made his move. He stood up, feigning a need for the lavatory right next to the cockpit door. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is on. You need to stay in your seat." Chloe called, but he pushed past her, heading toward the front. Simultaneously, the other flight attendant started moving the second beverage cart forward. The plan was obvious. The medical emergency drew the crew back. The two carts would jam the aisle, trapping the crew and passengers, leaving the front wide open. A simple, elegant, and terrifying plan. The aisle was blocked. The crew was distracted. All eyes were pointed away from the front of the plane. All eyes except for mine. Serafina had created her moment, a pocket of manufactured chaos in the sky. I stayed put, watching the nervous man lock himself in the forward lavatory. With the cabin's attention focused on the drama and coach, Serafina slid out of her seat, clutching her empty flute. Her movements were disguised as someone wanting a refill, but her eyes were fixed on a small, unassuming crew bag tucked beside the purser's jump seat. Inside that bag was a galley service key. My training screamed at me to move, but protocol is clear. No reveal until an overt act. Reaching for a key isn't a breach. Using it is. Revealing myself too early could spook her into an unpredictable escalation. So I waited, watching her reflection in the darkened window. She leaned over, pretending to pick something up. Her hand, quick as a snake, darted out toward the key. And then, at the last possible second, Chloe turned. Pure instinct. She took 2 quick steps back into the galley. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Her voice pure ice. Serafina snatched her hand back, flustered but defiant. I was just getting another glass of water. And I thought I dropped an earring. Chloe's eyes narrowed. She didn't buy it for a second. The seatbelt sign is on, she said, low and dangerous. Get back in your seat now. For the first time, I saw raw frustration in Serafina's eyes. She shot a venomous glare at Chloe, stalked back to her seat, and immediately started typing furiously on her phone. Phase 1 was a bust, but the nervous man was still in the lavatory. The aisle was still blocked. The quiet part of the operation was over. The loud part was about to begin. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Folks, Tower has advised us of some unexpected severe turbulence ahead. Flight attendants, take your jump seats immediately. As if on cue, the plane dropped. Not a gentle dip, but a sickening lurch that lifted your stomach into your throat. A collective gasp swept through the cabin. The beverage cart that Chloe had been trying to secure broke free, slamming into the bulkhead. A full bottle of expensive red wine flew into the air, hung there for a surreal half-second, and then shattered against the galley wall. The sound of breaking glass was sharp and loud, a gunshot in the tense quiet. And there it was, a large, jagged shard of dark green glass, the neck of the bottle, lying on the galley floor. A perfect improvised weapon. Serafina's eyes locked onto it. The turbulence had given her something her plan lacked. A weapon. The plane shuddered again. The lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping second, the cabin was plunged into total darkness before the emergency lights kicked in with an eerie glow. In that brief moment of blackness, I saw her move. Unbuckling her seatbelt under the cover of the jolt, she was half out of her seat, her eyes gleaming in the faint light, still fixed on that piece of glass. She was going for it. The time for quiet observation was over. The moment I had been preparing for had arrived. The lavatory door flew open. The nervous man, his face a mask of sweaty desperation, surged out. He launched himself at the cockpit door, his shoulder ramming against the reinforced panel. "Let us in!" "Let us in now," he shrieked. At the exact same moment, Serafina scooped the jagged neck of the wine bottle off the galley floor. She held it like a dagger, its sharp edge glinting. It was the nightmare scenario. A coordinated, violent attempt to breach the cockpit at 35,000 feet during severe weather. I moved. I used the momentum of the bucking plane, unbuckling and launching myself across the aisle in a single, fluid motion. I landed in a crouch between Serafina and the cockpit door, putting my body squarely in her path. She sized me up. "Security in a hoodie?" she snapped. I said, "Budget cuts," then louder. "Federal Air Marshal." "Drop the weapon." "Get on the ground." I simultaneously flashed my badge. She froze for a split second, her eyes wide with disbelief. The gray, forgettable man from 2A wasn't supposed to be a factor. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. I locked eyes with Marcus, the ex-military man in 3D, who was already unbuckling. "You," I shouted, pointing at him. "Block the aisle." "Nobody gets past you." He didn't ask questions. He nodded once, a sharp, affirmative gesture, and moved his large frame into the center of the aisle, becoming a human wall. "He was deputized," Serafina snarled, snapping out of her shock. She raised the broken bottle. "You're not real. You're nobody. Get out of my way." She lunged, trying to get around me to help her partner. I rode the motion of the plane, staying balanced. I moved inside her attack. You have to crowd the attacker in the narrow confines of a fuselage. I sidestepped her clumsy slash, my left hand shooting out to clamp down on her right wrist, the one holding the glass. My thumb pressed hard into the nerve cluster on the back of her hand. Her eyes widened as a jolt of pure white-hot pain shot up her arm. Her grip faltered. "You can't," she started. "I can," I said, and with my other hand I twisted her arm, forcing her wrist into a lock that bent her body forward, off balance and helpless. Her arrogance evaporated, replaced by a squeal of pain. The glass shard clattered to the floor. I kicked it under a seat, out of reach. "On your knees," I commanded, applying more pressure. She had no choice. She sank to the floor, whimpering. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. With Serafina neutralized, her partner's fight collapsed. He saw her on the ground and was just a scared, sweaty man again. He slid down the cockpit door and put his hands on his head, sobbing. Chloe was out of her jump seat, the worst of the turbulence having passed. She grabbed a set of flex cuffs from the emergency kit. We secured both of them. We hauled Serafina to her feet and propelled her back toward her seat in row 1, looping her seatbelt through the cuffs and cinching it tight. She couldn't stand up. She couldn't reach anyone. She was secure. She spat words instead. "I'll end your career. I'll sue you into the ground." I nodded at the dead camera on her tray table. "Low battery," I said. "Like your plan." The threat was over. I keyed the intercom button in the galley. "This is the Onboard Federal Air Marshal. The situation is under control. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." Marcus, the quiet hero, stood down, nodding. "Owe you a beer," he whispered as he sat. "Make it 2, I replied. "Government salary." The call to the cockpit was brief. "This is Marshal Monroe. 2 subjects attempted to breach the flight deck. They are both in custody, restrained and secured. No injuries. The cabin is secure." "Copy that, Marshal," the captain said, his voice tight with relief. "We're declaring an emergency and requesting priority landing in Denver." 20 minutes. The descent began immediately. I took the PA microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Federal Air Marshal again. As you can feel, we have begun our emergency descent into Denver. Pilots in full control. Stay seated. Belts tight. Eyes on the crew." Serafina, despite the cuffs, started yelling again. A stream of curses and threats. She was trying to claw back some control. I walked over to her row and leaned down, my face close to hers. I didn't raise my voice. "If you say one more word before we are on the ground," I whispered flat and cold, "I will add interfering with the flight crew and assault on a federal officer to the list of charges you're already facing. That's another 20 years. Your choice." Her mouth snapped shut. The threat of real, specific consequences had finally broken through her shield of untouchability. The landing was firm, but safe. The plane taxied to an isolated gate where a sea of flashing red and blue lights was waiting. The moment the door opened, FBI agents and local police flooded the cabin. I showed them my credentials. "Marshal Monroe, subjects are in 1A and 1C. They're all yours." They replaced my flex cuffs with steel ones. Serafina didn't say a word as they hauled her to her feet, a pale, slack mask of disbelief on her face. The reality was crashing down as she passed my row. Her eyes met mine one last time. "You have no idea who you've just messed with," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I will own you." "People like you?" I cut her off. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke the plain, simple truth. "People like me," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, "are the only reason people like you get to land safely." Her face crumpled. It was the one fact that invalidated her entire worldview. The agents pushed her gently forward and out onto the jet bridge. A week later, I saw her face on a news screen. The story wasn't about her heroic stand against a tyrannical airline. It was about her arrest, the federal charges, the potential for decades in prison. Her live stream, which she had thought was her greatest weapon, had become the prosecution's Exhibit A. The comments were time-stamped, archived, and subpoena-friendly. Fame cuts both ways. Chloe forwarded me the internal flag. "Do not upgrade. Do not serve alcohol. Do not engage." 3 checkboxes all ticked, poetry in an admin form. The FAA also levied the maximum civil penalty against her, a fine so large it would likely bankrupt her. She had wanted to cost the airline. Instead, she had cost herself everything. I put my phone away, pulled my hoodie up, and leaned my head back, waiting for the next flight. The world is full of people who think the rules don't apply to them, who believe their status means they can manufacture chaos without consequence. And it's full of quiet, tired people like me, the gray man in the back of the room, whose entire unheralded job is making sure they don't get away with it.